Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I thought this week I would try and persuade you that chocolate is actually a weight loss food. That sounds a little bit strange, and most people would assume that chocolate actually makes you fat, and that can be true, but we have to understand there are different types of chocolate, and chocolate has quite a complex chemical composition, and that chemical composition can vary, and that will affect the health effects that chocolate can have on us over the long term. So in order to be able to understand why chocolate can be beneficial for the health and may produce weight loss effects, we have to be able to understand something of the chemical composition of chocolate. Now, chocolate comes from is the main ingredient, the most important ingredient in chocolate really is cocoa powder, and cocoa powder comes from the cocoa bean, and cocoa bean is a product of the plant Latin name Theobroma coca. Historically, the cocoa bean was used possibly first in South America around the area of the Andes, where it was turned into a drink. It's not entirely sure where it was first used, but that's historically shown to be the likely first use of it. Now, when chocolate's made, the most important ingredient, I say, is cocoa powder. Now, there are different types of chocolate. There is dark chocolate, there's milk chocolate, and there's white chocolate. So what's the difference between these? Well, all forms of chocolate have cocoa butter in them, and that is the same for milk, for white, and for dark chocolate. And that is the fat content within the cocoa bean. Now, the colour you see in the chocolate depends really on the amount of cocoa powder that is put into the chocolate product. White chocolate has no cocoa powder in it. Milk chocolate has a small amount of cocoa powder, and dark chocolate has much more cocoa powder. And it's the cocoa powder that actually gives chocolate its health effects. So the first thing we can say about chocolate is it's not all the same, and the health effects likely come from the cocoa powder, and that means that dark chocolate is really the form of chocolate you need to eat if you want to have it as in your diet as part of your healthy diet. It's a healthy food, so it really needs to be the dark chocolate that you include. Milk chocolate and white chocolate have either less or no cocoa powder in respectively. They do have the cocoa butter, but it's the cocoa powder that really we need, and therefore white chocolate may not have as much the same health effects as dark chocolate. Now, there have been studies on white chocolate. It does have other effects, and there are other things that are added to white chocolate. So really I'm talking about the cocoa powder here. Now, cocoa powder is quite interesting because the chemical composition of cocoa powder is very similar to the chemical composition of green tea. There are methylxanthines in cocoa powder. They're caffeine-like molecules. And there are also a group of chemicals called the flavin-thiols. Now, the flavin-thiols are a subgroup of flavonoids. They include catechin, epicatechin, epigallocatechin, and epigallocatechin gallate. And these compounds are also present in black tea as theorubins and theoflavins. Now, they've been extensively studied. They have antioxidant effects in humans. They are bioavailable. They do get into our tissues, and they also appear to have insulin sensitizing effects. And these flavin-thiols may be one of the reasons that green tea is such a good weight loss food, because they seem to have these insulin sensitizing effects. And as we know from my previous blog articles and videos, insulin resistance is possibly the major cause of weight gain and obesity. So having insulin sensitizing effects, it makes it gives a clear scientific rationale as why they could cause weight loss. Now, cocoa powder has very similar chemical composition to green tea. It contains these flavin-thiols, but whereas in green tea these flavin-thiols are in monomeric units, in other words they're in their single chemical form, in cocoa powder they're in either dimers, trimers, or polymers. So whereas in green tea you might find a catechin molecule, in cocoa powder what you tend to find is you find 2, 3, 4 or multiple catechin molecules bonded together. So really, although these polymers are called proanthocyanins, they really are just made up of individual flavin-thiol units joined together. Now, Flavonoid digestion absorption is very complex, and it's not entirely understood how proanthocyanins are digested and absorbed, but they do get into the blood. We do see increases in antioxidant capacity following cocoa powder consumption. So even though they're joined together, they are likely broken down. That will be either in our small intestine or perhaps in our colon, where gut bacteria have the necessary enzymes to break these molecules apart, and they do appear to be absorbed. So chemically, cocoa powder is quite similar to green tea, so we might expect it to have weight loss effects. Now remember that it's only dark chocolate that contains large amounts of these proanthocyanins, and therefore it would be dark chocolate that we would expect to have the most health effects. And really, looking through the scientific literature, that's really what's found. When white chocolate is compared with dark chocolate, what you tend to find is that the dark chocolate has effects very similar that have been reported for green tea, whereas the white chocolate doesn't really have those effects. And this is more evidence that these flavin-thiols really are the active ingredient in green tea, and they're the active ingredient in cocoa powder as well. So if we go back to chocolate, if you include milk chocolate in your diet, you are also consuming quite a lot of sugar, because one of the other ingredients in chocolate is sugar. Now, white chocolate and milk chocolate tend to have quite high amounts of sugar in them, and that means that they're sweet, they're confectionery, and people like to eat them. Many people don't like dark chocolate because generally high quality dark chocolate is quite bitter, and that bitter taste comes from these proanthocyanins. It's those proanthocyanins and other phytonutrients within the cocoa powder that cause this bitter taste, and that is actually something that a lot of people don't like. Now, the companies that create chocolate aren't stupid. They know that if they create a product that's not very sweet and very tasty, people won't buy it. And that is why most confectionery, most chocolate that you can buy in the typical high street shop is milk chocolate or white chocolate, because it is sweet, it contains a lot of sugar, and it contains very little or no cocoa powder. Really, the line of distinction comes when you need to look for a high quality dark chocolate. Many of the companies that originally created dark chocolate, I won't name any names, but you could probably know the commercial names, have been bought by companies that create milk chocolate and white chocolate, and a lot of the cocoa, well, some of the cocoa powder has been removed and more sugar has been added. You can still buy high quality dark chocolate, and you might need to search for it, you might need to go to a health food shop, but that high quality dark chocolate with small amounts of sugar in it, the detrimental effects of the sugar tend to be outweighed by the beneficial effects of the polyphenols, of the proanthocyanins, which are a group of obviously their major group is polyphenols. The detrimental effects of the sugar is outweighed by the beneficial effects of the polyphenols, particularly in those people who have metabolic dysfunction. If you already have a high quality diet, what we're talking about here is the law of diminishing returns. If you have a high quality diet and you add dark chocolate to your diet, you're probably already ingesting lots of flavonoids. You probably already have lots of protection from flavonoids. What we seem to find in the literature is that the beneficial effects of dark chocolate are most prominent in those people who probably have a poor quality diet and aren't already eating a lot of flavonoids. So really, you've got to look at your own diet as to whether you're going to benefit from eating dark chocolate. And of course, I personally like dark chocolate, some people do, and therefore there's nothing wrong with having it in your diet in moderation. I wouldn't suggest you base your diet on eating chocolate, but certainly occasionally dark chocolate is not going to do any harm to those people eating a high quality diet, but it's going to benefit those people who probably don't have high amounts of flavonoids in their diet already. So that's something to consider. But however, if you want to get the benefits of dark chocolate and you want to eat chocolate regularly but you don't want the detrimental effects of the sugar, there's nothing wrong with just incorporating cocoa powder in your diet. Cocoa powder is available in tubs from supermarkets. It's pure cocoa powder. It contains all of the proanthocyanins you need with none of the sugar, and that is really the best way to incorporate this product into your diet in order to be able to benefit from the proanthocyanins. There are many ways you can put cocoa powder into your diet. If you make, for example, smoothies, if you've got a blender, adding cocoa powder, a couple of tablespoons of cocoa powder to that can actually turn it into a kind of a chocolatey drink. And you can incorporate cocoa powder into all sorts of sweets and desserts, into fruit, and there are other things that you can add it to in order to be able to have it in your diet regularly. And in that way you can benefit from these flavontriols without having to resort to eating dark chocolate. That's the way I would suggest that you try and get it in your diet. It does appear that chocolate has some very important health effects, particularly to the cardiovascular system. And if we compare it to green tea, I would say that the chemical composition is very similar to green tea, and the health effects based on the literature to date are in the same kind of ballpark that you get from consuming green tea regularly. Obviously, these foods are quite often interchangeable as well. If you already drink a lot of green tea, you may not benefit so much from drinking cocoa powder. But there is a small amount of overlap between these foods. But they do seem to have specific individual effects as well. So small amounts of all of these healthy foods in your diet is a much better way to go than large amounts of one of the a single food. If you currently drink a lot of green tea, if you drank slightly less green tea but incorporated cocoa powder into your diet as well, you would probably find that you actually had health benefits from that. And this is the synergism of phytochemicals. Although structurally they're very similar, there's a large amount of overlap. They do seem to have these specific individual effects, and when they're incorporated into the diet together, they then tend to have synergistic effects, which are greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So I would suggest that you look at cocoa powder as a healthy food. Whether you get that from chocolate or from the actual powder is up to you. But remember, it's the cocoa powder that has the health effects, not the cocoa butter. The cocoa butter is in all chocolate. It's the amount of cocoa powder that you want to have a look on the ingredients to see how much there is in the actual chocolate. And if you're not sure but you want to get the benefits of chocolate, the benefits of cocoa powder, then simply incorporate cocoa powder into your diet in some other way. Of course, you can drink cocoa powder. It's not so common now, but go back 50 years, and a lot of people had a cup of cocoa before they went to bed, and I think it was more common to do that than it perhaps is now. I think drinking chocolate is perhaps taken over that role, and again, drinking chocolate is similar to milk chocolate in the fact that it's cocoa powder with added sugar. It's not the same as real cocoa, which is really just a drink made from cocoa powder. So I hope that was interesting. Chocolate is a healthy food if it's got high amounts of cocoa powder in it, and it's really the cocoa powder that is healthy. And this cocoa, the flavontriols have been shown to have weight loss effects. They have insulin sensitizing effects, and therefore you could argue that chocolate or certain types of chocolate are weight loss foods. But as with everything in high quality diets, moderation is the key. Anything, if it's overconsumed, can be bad for you. So what you really need to do is, if you want to eat chocolate, you need to incorporate it in a healthy form, in moderation, and as part of a healthy diet. If you have any comments on this video, please leave them in the comments box below, and as always I will try to get back to you, and hopefully I will see you next week for some more nutritional advice.